Now on to the pros of the game and the riders that were there at the Royal meeting. This is a chance for us here on the show, as we do week in, week out. Every Tuesday, 7:30, we'll be on here analysing the week's form gone by, giving eye catchers, pitching Matt Mitter's ratings against those of the BHA handicapper to find out where the value is in the weeks to come. This week, of course, we're looking at the fallout of Royal Ascot. Now, where to start but on the Tuesday with the Queen Anne and Solo, the initial winner on the Royal Day, I thought was impressive.
Yeah, it was very impressive. Group 1, Queen Anne's takes over the mile, and of course lots being made, prior to this, that Lockinge form at Newbury. But I think we said last week, or I certainly said, that I wasn't calling it a load of rubbish, but saying there was a lot of form evidence suggesting that it was a little bit questionable. And Solo, take nothing away from that horse. I mean, he did it very, very well, winning the length, and did very well because he was actually up with the pace, where some of the with the second and third are actually a more positive tactic. And of course, then that lead came from Tormore, and of course Night of Thunder were bang up there and had absolute no excuses. Tormore turned the form round, didn't he, with Night of Thunder for that run, but he was entitled to a big burly horse at Newbury. But Solo, no, I think this is right up there. Of course, that's not, the third horse, Cougar Mountain, was probably the eye catcher of the race, who of course ran in the Lockinge race, didn't have things go his way. Interesting enough, that horse desperately needs to step up in trip, and that's a surefire Group 1 winner when stepping up to, I think 1.25 miles, even perhaps 1.5 miles. And I thought it was interesting that this Fastnet Rock, who of course qualifier's father, Claire, she stays very well. And I just think this is, I keep on seeing it the last couple of days when I'm looking at horses, especially over Ascot, and thought, Fastnet Rock again, and clearly stays well.
Yeah, they do like this one, don't they, as a sire, Fastnet Rock. Just before we move on to other races on the card, in terms of that Lockinge form now, because we did see it as quite a strong race initially, as it's panned out, we've pulled weaknesses from there. Of course, Night of Thunder maybe didn't enjoy the ground with it being very firm on the day. But where do we sit on the Lockinge form now, Matt?
No, I think we've been making too many excuses if we start saying Night of Thunder on the ground. We're here with this a lot. On the form, Tormore had maybe Night of Thunder, who was a little bit keen in the race. We did that, maybe the reason why Tormore's been a length and a half. But there's not a lot of discrepancy in the distance from what they've done before. And I just think this is another example of perhaps the Lockinge form at the time. You Cable Bay was big prices, and I fell into the trap of thinking it was good form because things came out. But when you looked back, you just thought, hold on a minute, they were beating the same horses, and that was why I questioned the form. I mean, going forward, look, I'm not saying it's really bad form. I'm saying that I think Tormore and Night of Thunder ran to marks around the 122 mark, where the winner Solo, I believe, performed to mark of 129. That's quite a gulf, isn't it? Between two.
So nothing goes and bolts in the Sussex or something like that. What we're saying is we don't actually. There's a top crop of milers here, but maybe something like Cougar Mounting, if stepping up in trip, could be worth keeping an eye on.
Absolutely. I mean, Cougar Mountain is the negative there, that does wear the cheek piece. I don't necessarily like to see that in group horses. However, Aidan O'Brien does a few of his horses and had success along the way. But that's the horse I take out of the race going forward. The like to Solo, bang up there, and this is a real quality Group 1 animal.
Fair enough. Okay, well, on from Group 1 animals to more Group 1 animals. The King's Stand Stakes, of course, was won by Gold Dream there on the opening day at Royal Ascot. What do we make of Gold Dream? He was in front of a 50-to-1 shot Magician Man with Soul Power in behind there, I think 5th or 6th in the end.
Yeah, it was.
4th. Even.
Yeah, I mean, Gold Dream 20-to-1. I think even the trainer was surprised. I think the trainer either admittedly said that his friends at Royal Ascot, are a bit cross because he didn't tell any of them to get on, and no wonder. I mean, the winner was behind Paul Secret in the Temple Stakes, beat in some way Paul Secret's in this race to turn that form around, and the second was 50-to-1. Had all the contraptions on the tongue tie and the cheek pieces. I just don't think it's very good form going forward.
I mean, this is difficult to read for somebody that may have stepped into the racing, to the punting area in the last year or so, especially with these 5 furlong sprints. Okay, so you have something like Gold Dream, which has previously finished behind horse in the field. Now the form has been turned back on its head, what's the excuse here?
Well, there is many. I mean, you could say that the first 3 home and well up with the pace. I mean, it was very fast ground at Ascot, and maybe a case can be made from that. I guess Paul Secret was done the best from those ones that are being held up, and I'd fancy Paul Secret actually on another day to turn the form around completely. I think this piece of form, I mean, on the show we're going to talk about obviously not just positive form, but actually also form that I think, you know, take it on. There's a lot of people that like to play on the exchanges and like to take horses on, and this is one bit of form going forward. I think this is a real poor Group 1.
Okay, and obviously one horse to definitely mention though before we move on to the big one, the St James Palace Stakes, has to be Soul Power. He's always the talk of every race that he runs in. He always captures the headlines. Sadly didn't bag himself a third unprecedented King's Stand Stakes on the day. Why did he not manage to get to the line then?
Well, I think he's another horse that the reason we hear lots about him is because there's either two things. It's either terrific ride from the jockey who's had to weave his way through, or it's a hard luck story. And with horses like that, you know, when we're investing our good hard money on racing, he's always one for me you must avoid, because everything needs to go right. And I just felt that the horses were coming back to Richard Hughes, and of course then he had to have wide open spaces, and once that horse has that, then he's only going to do everything in the one pace. He'll probably go in when nobody's on Soul Power, but for me he's definitely a horse that you always have to take on.
Okay, yeah, obviously he does like sniffing his way past a few in a big pack, doesn't he?
Don't we all?
Always see him nestling between horses, but you're right, caught in open space this time, and maybe left the horse with a little bit too much to do. St James Palace Stakes, now certainly one that was left in a bit of open space was the eventual winner Glen Eagles, but that was just because he put a nice bit of clear space between himself and Make Believe. Was it impressive, or did he not beat much, Matt?
I was surprised afterwards to hear the trainers say that it was one of the best milers 3-year-olds that he's ever had. I was a bit taken back with that. I'm not sure the depth of this race when you look at the second horse, 25-1, who of course was only second in a listed race. Make Believe never run its race, with Consort having his second run in third. You know, it's a Group 1 in status. I've rated the horse 1, 2, 4, which when we're talking about solo in that race, you know, it's a good £5 beneath that. At the moment, of course, Glen Eagles could improve. I do think the ground's important. I think having it like the road, like it was, I think the horse needs good to firm. I think they should make hay at the moment, because I've got a feeling later in the year when the ground goes, he won't be winning anything at all.
Okie doke, yeah, well, I mean, that's what we said, what is there to beat as well, and we've marked that going on, you know, you might have Solo to beat, and that will be a battle despite the £5 difference that you've marked up there. That's really Tuesday's card mark, so if we're talking about horses to follow from that Tuesday, it would be...
I think Cougar Mountain, very interesting when stepping up in trip. I mean, it was 16-1 this day. Is probably always going to go off and be a little bit of value. You know, keep an eye on that horse. But more, there's the Gold Ream form. That would be form that I'd really want to take on going forward. Okay, that's fair enough. Let's skip into Wednesday now. This is one where it really had me kicking the can. Amazing Maria. I tipped this horse up back on an editorial that I wrote some. Must have been over 14 months ago now. I said Amazing Maria for the Epsom Oaks. Now, it didn't actually go off on the day because ground was a little touch too firm. It continued to run on the softer surfaces in France, and yes, I continued to believe that this horse wanted the softer surfaces. However, turning up on good to firm ground in the Duke of Cambridge seemed to suit. And I take it you went on.
No.
Nothing on. I mean, there's lots of ways of looking at this piece of form. I do want to highlight the winner and some form collaterally going backwards. But I mean, Integral, of course, also ran in this race, and Integral was another example of the Lockinge form being let down. I mean, you know, it's arguable whether she's ran a race from the Lockinge. I don't think she has. I mean, I think she's probably run a good £10 beneath that. But even so, things weren't at this time of the week weren't going so well with Sir Michael Stout. Was Bragan was also in that race. I think he's bettered that as well. So you could query with Rosina in second how good this actually formed in. Rosina herself, I've never really rated as much. But even so, let's take nothing away from the winner, Amazing Maria. Going forward, I think she's probably going to struggle a little bit. She was held up when everything fell apart in front of her. But what I thought was very interesting is that a couple of runs ago, she ran third in a very decent handicap at Ascot, which Temptress won, and also in third was Solar Magic. Well, Temptress came out and was second in the Royal Hunt Cup against Jim Hopkins, showing that form, she shouldn't have been a 25-1 on this day. But the horse I want to highlight is Solar Magic, who has nothing to do with this form, but was third in that race at Ascot. And I fell for Solar Magic last time up at Nottingham, thinking stepping up to the 1.25 miles, she had every chance. She always looked to me like she was a group horse. Disappointed bitterly at Nottingham, but this bit of form goes to prove. She's got a mark of 97. I've raised 116. Wherever Solar Magic goes, put her in your notebook, and she's definitely worth following.
Okay, fair call. So you obviously managed to pick out an eye catcher that wasn't actually in the race and couldn't have ran eye catchingly. But no, brilliant to analyse this form, and where you may not be so keen on backing Amazing Maria next time out or whatever, you can actually find something going back in the form, such as Solar Magic there. So keep an eye on Solar Magic, who Value Rater now puts up as a shot at 116 rating. So Solar Magic could go well next time out. The Prince of Wales Stakes is arguably, the jewel in the crown of the week, isn't it? Now, this was what I would call the hard luck story of the week, not necessarily the jewel in the crown of the week. The Great Gatsby surely should have won that race. And yes, I was on.
Only needed another yard, and it was a length, it was a length in front. It was. I must say that the winning jockey on Free Eagle, lots have been said quite rightly for Ryan Moore with his 9-timer at Ascot, but Pat Smullin, an absolute genius on this, I thought, and we'll speak about another race later on in the week. But I thought this was a real good ride. The Great Gatsby, very unlucky. I had this feeling going into the race that the Grey Gatsby obviously represented the form without Kazim over the extended 1.25 miles over in Islands. And I just got a feeling this Grey Gatsby is a winner waiting to happen, but at the wrong trip. I think he wants 1.5 miles and would be an absolute given. I think he's the eye catcher going up in trip. I'd always think he'd be a little bit vulnerable over the 1.25 miles. One horse to mention in the race, very disappointing again, Sir Michael Stout, was Cannock Chase. This horse finishing 7th, should have done better. We were all I certainly was, blaming the ground for, but this is a regression for Cannock Chase, and that horse is one I would like to take on going forward. Western Hymn was in 3rd, ran really well on ground that he didn't like for me. I think this horse can be a £7 better horse when he encounters a little bit of underfoot conditions, but going forward, I've rated this race, quite highly for Group 1 status, and for me going forward, obviously the Great Gatsby, when stepping up to 1.5 miles, I think he's an absolute given in a Group 1. Let's not forget, and Free Eagle and Grey Gatsby is all the Australia form when you look back. How good is that form?
Do you worry at all that, of course, the way that the Grey Gatsby finished his race, there won't actually be a price at all on him next time? Probably not.
That's, you can't make those decisions till you see your opposition, can you? I'm not telling people out there to go and back it at any price. I'm just mentioning that, stepping up to 1.5 miles might be his ultimate trip.
Okie doke. Well, there we go. So out of Wednesday at least, we've found one that wasn't on the Wednesday, Solar Magic. You rate him 116. Certainly have a look at that next time out. Cannock Chase, probably going to leave that alone. You feel the horse in regression. And if you do find the Grey Gatsby stepping up in trip over this flat season to come, then get on the Grey Gatsby. Although the price might be a little bit shorter, the way that he nosed his way up to Free Eagle at the end of that race there, the Prince of Wales Stakes. It was a real nail-biting finish, and sadly Spencer couldn't get the Grey Gatsby up for whoever was on that day. On the Thursday, of course, the Norfolk Stakes. Now this was a poignant winner. That it was the 200th or 250th anniversary of the Battle of Waterloo, and what turned up but Waterloo Bridge at odds of 12-1, I believe, with Ryan Moore, that man again.
Incredible, yeah. Of this race, of all the races we're going to talk about, the 2-year-old, this is a real good race for me. Waterloo Bridge, of course, Logout Island and King of Rocks were all the rage. 11-8, 13-8. The Hannons couldn't separate the pair. Of course, Gerard Sullivan, formerly trained King of Rocks, and of course sold it on. The horse, this now ridden by Frankie Dettori.
Al Shakab.
Of course, yes. Sorry, the name escaped me for a moment. What I would say is that the form makes complete sense. Well, Logout Island, Britannia, who won at the Royal Meeting, Logout Island beat that 5.5 lengths, and also King of Rocks, when you look back, beat Britannia 5.5 lengths. So it's uncanny that they've still finished within exactly the half length of each other. The reason I've mentioned this race is that a lot of commentators said, well, they went off too quick, they, you know, all this talk, but it wasn't the fact. And if you go back and look at the race, all that happened was the horses stayed at the same pace. They went no faster off the bridle than they did on it. Now that is a clear indicator that a horse wants further. And if we look back at King of Rock's debut run at Ascot over 5, when he was well gambled 6 into 7 to 2, when he looked the winner a furlong out, it was a case of him getting outpaced. Now, I truly believe this form, when this horse steps up, you know, I do believe next year this form could be very, very exciting. And I think King of Rooks could well be, I think he will, you know, this could be a Guineas type horse. I believe he will get up to a mile. I'm very, very impressed. And I think this form, of all the 2-year-old form that we've seen last week, is head and shoulder above the rest.
Who's the better horse out of the Hannon Strings there, Logat Island and King of Rooks going forward?
I think at these trips, 5 and 6 furlongs, I think Logat Island will, because it's got more. I think the horse has got natural more speed and stays, where King of Rooks, I think that horse is more of the stayer of the two. Once they start going up in trip and you start going to the, I don't know, 7 to a mile, I think this King of Rooks will leave him for dead. Exciting
nevertheless when you can run a horse such as King of Rooks, shows great pace.
Absolutely.
Of course doesn't get there in the end, and you know there's more to come over the extended trip, possibly a fine specimen in King of Rooks to come. The Tercentenary Stakes, this really was a cracking performance. Goes to the Juddmonte International next time out. Of course, we're talking about Time Test, which provided us with arguably the performance of the week for trainer Roger Charlton. First time he actually had a winner in the Tercentenary, but he looks to have a really good one on his hands now.
Yeah, I think we highlighted this horse as an eye catcher a few weeks ago on the show, Time Test, from that race
at Newbury,
London Gold Cup. And again, more examples of handicap form turning out to be real good, strong. You know, me and my members at Valurette were all over this on the daytime test, and it was very, very impressive. Into Group 3 company, held up under Frankie Dettori and came there like he just jumped in at the 2 furlong pole, absolutely cantering, and to go on and win 3 1/4 lengths in very impressive style, you know. And looking behind, he's beaten Peacock 3 1/4 lengths, who was second to the Derby winner. If you take a strict line, and it puts this time test in front of the Derby winner. Admittedly, we're talking over a mile and a quarter trip, but the form makes perfect sense. Peacock in second, Muchadim was in third, quarter of a length. Both those horses ran together at Newmarket, and they finished exactly in the same place. Now, I think this is real serious form. I'd like Time Test myself to stay around the 1 1/4 trip, so I don't think there's any need to start stepping up to 1.5 miles. I think he'd probably get a 1.5 miles, but what's the point?
What's the point when he's improving so well over 1 mile?
And you've got plenty of speed and you can stay, but potentially I could I thought it before the race on a rating of 1.22 that I hadn't run to at Newbury. I think he's run every bit up to that, if not a little bit more, and for me is a definite Group 1 animal.
Now, yeah, I'm sure you heard it as well, but certainly Valurator suggested that if you put a strict form line through this, then you'd have to rate Time Test slightly better than our very own Derby winner Golden Horn. Can you do that?
I think so. I mean, when we look at this form, and I think, you know, I say Peacock was in second, 3 1/4 lengths. We keep on discussing, and then a quarter length behind Muchadim. Well, they finished in the same place the time before, so why can't we believe this form? And it's uncanny, it happens again and again and again. And even though I am a believer that some paces of race affect outcomes at lower levels, I do believe when you get to a higher level of group class, I'm not so sure the pace matters so much. If that makes any sense to people, but I just think at that kind of level they generally do run it. It's surprising that people say, well, horses, oh, we'll come on for that run. No, I don't think it necessarily is, unless the Peacock and Muchadim have come on at it's uncanny, isn't it? How
sure.
You finish together like
and lovely to see, obviously, Khalid Abdullah have Time Test there in the green and pink colours, carries those to the Juddmonte International, as I said, a race obviously won by the mighty Frankel in those exact colours. Will you be backing Time Test on the day for the Juddmonte?
Again, you'd have to see what opposition, you know, I'm not sitting on the fence, see what the opposition is. There's just nothing not to like about the horse. I mean, like the way he travelled into the race, the way he quickened. I mean, you could argue that I think it is fact that Peacock certainly is a 1.5 mile horse. So he's sprinted past a 1.5 mile horse. It'd be interesting when he tackles 1.25 mile horses. Maybe that turn of foot looked more impressive because he was beating a horse that stays there. We have to wait and see. I mean, he's a Group 3 winner. He's got to prove that he's gonna have to step up. And I'm sure that in mind this horse has been improving. And Roger Charlton, you know, they've gone from a handicap, and I'm sure they'll be in no rush with this horse. You know, just slowly catching monkey.
Yeah, watch out for that London Gold Cup form. We did talk about it just over a fortnight ago and expected that winners would come out of that race, nonetheless in the shape of time test. You could well go on from being a handicapper to a big Group 1 player by the end of the month. Now, Thursday was, of course, all about the Gold Cup, Ladies' Day, Gold Cup Day, and we've got a graphic popping up on the screen to see exactly what value rate are made of the performances on the day. I think we should probably start with Kingfisher. Now, when Ryan Moore came in from this ride and he explained on the radio in the morning, he was actually very disappointed with himself. OK, the horse may have got slightly unlucky, but he was disappointed that he didn't manage to get the horse up. Now, have you franked that in your ratings?
I haven't. Again, we'll explain here. Now, what we've got here is the horses, the age of the horses, the weight they were carrying, the BHA, which is the official handicapper, what they had in rating before the race. I must stress that's before the race. At the off. The VR section. Now, this is what I've assessed the horse after the race. Now, Trip to Paris 121, Kingfisher 120, Forgotten Rules 120, Cinnamon 119, Bafferon 119, Scotland 118. What you can see is it was a very bunch finish that you could have thrown a blanket over them. Now, to speak about past Gold Cups, to give you some indicator what I'd be rating, when we think of the Leading Light, for example, I rated it that year 124. So I'm suggesting this form is £3 beneath that. It's not a vintage Group 1. I thought what was interesting about the race is normally a lot of horses don't stay, don't they? And you get a few sort of go away. Most of the field seem to stay, actually, you know, which seems very, very unusual for these kind of horses to stay at 2 miles in a half. In answer to your question at Kingfisher, I think Ryan Moore was quite right to be annoyed with himself. I think he sat too long expecting that gap down the outside. You know, for what he's gotten beaten, I can understand his frustration, but when you're in a race, you know, it's all very well for me to say that, but you know, in a normal time, a gap would have opened over that kind of distance because the horse would have been tired and coming back to you. But they weren't, were they? They did all galloping well to the line. But without a doubt, if he had got a run, he would have won. So you can, even though I've got him producing the mark there 120, you could mark him up a little, I think a little bit better than that.
Every chance then that going forward to other 2 mile contests over the flat season, I'm thinking possibly Goodwood Cup and then long distance cup when it is Champions Day at Ascot. We've seen them all finish quite close together. We say they've all stayed the trip. You've put them up with similar ratings. There's every chance that these figures, say the same 8 that we've got here, or at least 6 or 4 of them reoppose. There's every chance that could be flipped around, the winners there.
Well, I think what the form tells us is that if you imagine Forgotten Rules ran against Kingfishers, I think it was over the mile 6 or mile 7. Well, that day Forgotten Rules thrashed Kingfisher. I think the improver for the trip in the race is Kingfisher. Without a doubt, he's improved a ton for stepping up, when perhaps Forgotten Rules hasn't. He's just ran his race. Forgotten Rules, for me, he definitely wants some undercut. He might well improve a little bit for that, but I'm not sure he'll improve an enormous amount. Let's talk about our charity bets that we had. Of course, me and you were fighting out the 4th place with Cimarron and Bafferon. Cimarron, for me, really kind of, you've got to say at 8 years old, clearly not progressing. So even though I think the horse has run his race, it kind of a little bit disappointed for me to see it there, and that's what devalues the form a little bit. Bafferon, I thought, ran really well, having been a little bit keen, but my surprise, I mean, most horses did stay. I don't think it's a vintage Group 1, but nevertheless, it's a Group 1. But Trip to Paris, I would, in summary, wherever Trip to Paris, have they ever met most of these horses in the first 5, I'd be taking it on.
You're going to be taking it on, yeah, because there's so much to say they're similar. I, in fact, obviously was a victim of my own words really with Cimarron. I simply said, you know, it'll give you a good run for his money, he'll give you a good race, he'll give you, it'll be a genuinely good performance, but he might not win it. And and so fourth isn't quite good enough to return you any money at all in that Gold Cup, nor win the charity bet, which was kindly given to us by Betfair on the day. So thanks for that. Trip to Paris was the eventual winner, and Matt Mitter thinks oppose him wherever you go, because quite simply there are others in there that have still got chances in this 2 mile category. Now, the other race on the card, the other ones that we got to talk about there on the Thursday was the King George V Stakes. Again, this was a race where one was left out in front and others were closing in behind, none less than Andrew Balding's Scottish. Andrew Balding didn't manage to get a winner throughout Royal Ascot, but he couldn't have possibly been closer and was probably, again, kicking the can after Scottish seemed to finish so quickly with so much promise. He surely could have got there, Matt.
Yeah, I was a little bit frustrated. Going into this race, it looked competitive, and it looked like, for me, I thought, yeah, my ratings, I thought, oh yeah, this Scottish, couldn't see him being out the frame. Dissolution went off 9 to 4, and it was a ridiculous price, only because obviously the Ryan Moore factor, would have done that. But in summary to this race, I think personally of all the handicaps in the week, this is the strongest piece of form going forward for future winners. I mean, Space Age, you had a handicap mark of 88, Scottish in second, of course, come out of that a Newbury maiden. He's just, the trouble with Scottish is he's just slow, he's got no turn of foot. And before that race, and I've seen that at Newbury, I thought, oh, maybe he might be a Ledger kind of type. But now, having seen him over the 1.5 miles and seeing the fact he couldn't quicken, I couldn't have him like that. He could just be a cup horse, an Ascot Gold Cup going forward, maybe next year. I think he stays very well. Must mention, the strength of even Dartmouth was in 6th. Don't forget that Dartmouth came out of a very, very good handicap at Sandown. And back in 8th, Disillusion. Many will look at the form and say, well, another one of Sir Michael Stout's not running particularly well. I'm not sure that is the case. I just think that the 7 in front of it had loads more in hand, and I still think that Disillusion itself probably is still in front of the handicapper. But going forward, mark my words, I would suggest to people that just the whole of this race, just back to 7th position, get him in your horse trackers and follow the form through, because I think this is some really strong form this, Tom.
So yeah, to highlight those races that we're really keen on, of course, the London Gold Cup at Newbury is one that we'll still be keeping eyes on with Time Test's performance. The King George V Stakes now marks the book as another race that we're certainly going to be pulling horses out of for the future season. Just a word on Disillusioned. When a horse gets caught in between a wall of runners and it simply can't get out, can't do anything, okay, the handicap mark will probably stay very similar.
Yeah.
Is it a horse to be on next time out?
I don't know. He's not sitting on the fence, but it depends where the horse is. He's been well gambled. He's never going to be missed, is he? And he won't get probably put up too much, if anything at all, for this race. But wherever he goes, he's probably not going to be the best of value. But I think the likes of Scottish, Scottish certainly over 1.5 miles. I'm sure that even the good ground, I think a bit of cutting the ground when that speed factor isn't so much of an importance, when it might be a bit of cut in the ground where you cut that out and you might blunt some speed elsewhere, than this Scottish, surefire winner at 1.5 miles and very, very unlucky to bump in Spice Age. But Spice Age himself was a winner at Newmarket, a form that worked out really well. No matter where you go with this form, it strikes you as just being really, really strong form.
Okay, we'll put that in your notebook. King George V Stakes, anything coming out of that race is worth backing. Disillusion probably still won't get a price on it, because as we say, it sticks out like a sore thumb in the post in the morning. But Scottish, 1 mile 4, stepping up 1 mile 6, even a cup horse value rater says for Scottish. The Andrew Balding, owned by Fitchery Hay, stepping up in trip, is one to look out for coming out of that strong handicap, the King George V Stakes. Now we'll move on to Saturday. On the day, Richard Hannon rolled in the 3rd of the Queen's Procession's carriages. Quickly had to jump off and saddle up Palawan for the Chesham Stakes now, Matt. Now this horse entered the race some 25 to 1 shot, second time out. Wasn't likely to get the better of his rivals on the day, but you think is worth following for such races, such big races as, dare I say it, the Guineas next year?
Well, I think this, I think he's full of quality. I was watching some racing replay at Leicester a few weeks ago, and it was a €2 race, and he ran in this. And he wasn't in a fancy, he was a bit of a drifter just before the off, but I watched him, Ryan was on, and he was running, I think it was 5 or something, it might even been 5 furlongs. And I remember watching him thinking, blimey, that horse looks like he's got a lot of quality when he steps up to like a mile. So I was a little bit interested in him at big prices in the morning. He was 50s, 33 to 1. I mean, you have to watch this Chesham Stakes. I mean, Richard Hughes settled him at the back of the field and was going absolutely nowhere. It was almost like Richard accepted that he was outpaced at a championship 7 furlongs pace, and then all of a sudden gave him a few flicks and thought, hold on a minute, this horse is picking up, and he'd moved from about 12th place. All of a sudden he's finished 4th place, and when he hit the line he would, not to say that he was full of running quick and away, but I remember thinking to myself, oh, you really catch my eye as a horse with a lot of class. And a mile might not be far enough for him, actually, because when you a championship 7 furlongs, if you can't go, a mile might be too short. I mean, son of Mount Nelson, of course, who stayed 1.25 miles very well. These trips, the fact they stepped him up from first time to 7 furlongs. Another horse that we must highlight, an owner, Gerard Sullivan, who you just got to admire, really. Gerard Sullivan, he's not the oldest guy going. I'd actually bumped into him.
I'm sure he'll be pleased that you've mentioned that he's not the oldest guy going on the show. He'll be flattered by that. Cheers, Gerard.
I met Gerard at Waterloo to try and get him on the show in a podcast and that, but he won't come on for those reasons. But a successful businessman, and I think what you've got to do is absolutely take your hat off to him, because he's getting everything he gets seems to turn to gold, doesn't it, with him? And he's made good sales recently with the €2. He's got Palawan here. You just got to take your hat off to a man like that, really.
Yeah.
But going forward, Palawan, definitely the one to take out the Chesham Stakes, but probably needs 1 mile and perhaps 1.25 miles.
Palawan, yes, is a progeny, should I say, of Mount Nelson, 1 mile 2 furlong, eclipse winner, no doubt. So stepping up in trip should not be a problem for Palawan there, one to keep an eye on. Next race on the card was the Wolverton, of course, history made by John Gosden, who claimed his 3rd win in the race. All credit goes to Paul Hannigan on Masood.
Yeah, Masood, a horse, we often talk about horses, or I certainly do talk about horses, whether they're going to be, don't naturally improve as much as people make out, that the handicapper hasn't caught up. But this horse, I follow very closely. His last 3 runs, he's steadily on my rating's been improving from £4 to £7. He's taken a little bit of time to get a hang of the game. I mean, he's been running some real strong 1.25 mile races at good paces and find himself at the back of the field. And you just, if you stop the tape half a mile out, you think, well, he's going nowhere, and managed still to win. But this time more prominent with Paul Hannigan, and he was always going to get there. You just 2 furlongs out, even though he was nowhere near the front, there was just that you thought, yeah, he's going to get there, he's going to get there. Did it by half a length. This is good form, firefighting, Snockian Star, which is obviously the form that we highlighted at Epsom a few weeks ago. The horse to take out the race, I mean, obviously the winner's going to go on and do more good things, I'm sure, is Providence of Sir Michael Stoutes in 5th, who was held up towards the rear, didn't get the best of runs and then finished well. He's definitely a horse that'll be winning very, very soon. Providence over the 1.25 miles.
Providence over 1.25 miles is the one to take out of the Wolverton. Keep your eye on the Sir Michael Stout, Cheveley Park owned runner there. Now lastly, we've got a couple of seconds literally to spare on the Hardwick. Snow Sky, I'm sure that most people think that he's done it very well from the front. Great ride from Pat Smullen, I think you alluded to earlier. Keep following Snow Sky, or should we look back through the book and say, no, I'm going to keep to my guns and be on Telescope next time out?
I mean, Snow Sky stays very well. It was always going to be a little bit of a tactical affair for this race. And they decided, I don't think he necessarily wanted to make all, but he was the one that had to make it if there was no pace, being a horse that stayed 1.6 miles. I mean, I fancied him a lot for the St. Ledger last year. It didn't come off of there. He clearly stays well. The likes of Eagle Top in 2nd, he needs to go up in trip under, even at Championship 1.5 miles. I'm not sure that I think he needs further for me. But the likes of Postponed, I could easily give another chance to. But what a disappointment in Telescope. I mean, if it wasn't for Snow Sky winning, you would have been saying all week, well, something's wrong in Sir Michael Stout's yard. But if Snow Sky was feeling any ill effects from Sir Michael Stout's other horses, well, this is even a better performance, and perhaps it does need marking that. But Snow Sky is obviously, he made all from the front under Pat Smullen, and it was a terrific ride, and I thought Pat Smullen was the jockey of the meeting based on those two rides.
Interesting category to follow, and of course more interesting than what you're saying is to follow Top Eagle over further distances.
Further distances, and give, I forgot what the name of the horse is now, but...
Telescope or Postponed?
Postponed, give that another chance.
Give it another chance. Yeah, well, it looks good. I mean, Luca Kamani just seems to bring these horses on quite well, and that really does draw it to an end there for the fallout of the Royal Ascot meeting. Value Rater, I'm sure, will throw up a tweet of what his favourite eye catcher, what the best eye catcher of the week was, should you have missed the earlier part of the show. Of course, we did have Jack Lander on, who's obviously walking all the way to, and we want you to be part of the show next week, as well as us talking about the form here. It's all about getting you on. So any questions, racing topics you want to discuss with Matt live on the show, tweet us at Value Rater or email value.rater@outlook.com.
Yeah, will be next week. We'll be looking in depth at the collar eclipse. So if anyone's got if you've got an opinion of the collar eclipse, then just send me an email, and we can talk about it, and yeah, we can chew the fat over it.
Yeah, that's it. Chew the fat over it. Well, obviously next week, again, we will be previewing the Coral Eclipse. If you do have a view on that one, tweet us exactly what your tip for that race is. We'll also be fleshing out, as ever, all of the hard luck stories from the big one, the Northumberland Plate, and giving you the class acts that happen over in the Curragh from the Irish Derby. We'll see you next week at 7:30.